Hi guys, and welcome to Global Crime Time. If this is your first visit to the channel, please give the video a like, as it really does help grow the channel. And if you like what you see, then please subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to hit the bell for notifications of when my videos come out. Now, today we are going to go back in time, 134 years back in time. It's November 1888. London has just been rocked again after the brutal murder of Mary Kelly. 65 miles away in a small town called Havant in Hampshire, England, a murder took place that had certain similarities with the Jack the Ripper killings. So much so that it was even thought that it could have actually been Jack himself. In some respects, this murder was more shocking in its details. The victim was just 8 years old, and the alleged murderer of the crime was just a few years older. This is the unsolved case which came to be known as the Havant Boy Ripper. Around 6 p.m. on the Monday the 20th of November 1888, 8-year-old Percy Knight Searle was sent by his mother to purchase a small amount of shirting from the draper shop run by Mr. Randall on North Street, not more than 300 yards distance from their home. The family lived in Bugs Row, which was a row of squalid, poorly maintained houses that would have been situated around here, just at the end of what is now Waterloo Road. The boy was seen by several of his school friends as he made his way to the shop, and he purchased the material and left to make his way home. The boy was seen by several of his school friends as he made his way to the shop, and he purchased the material and left to make his way home. The shop was situated at the end of this road I'm standing at now. On his way home, he had used a thoroughfare known as New Lane. At one side of New Lane was Manor House School, which would have been here. On the other side was Pallant House, over here. It was very dark at this point, and about a third of the distance home the child was violently attacked. At around this time, Robert Husband, aged 11, was, according to his latest statement, sent on an errand by his father. As he passed the top of New Lane, he saw a man doing something to a boy. Husband had stated that it was very dark at the time, and my attention was called to the matter by a voice like that of a boy making a regular squeal. Not as though he's being hided or anything like that. It was a queer sound, like a gurgling noise. There was a lamp at the top of the lane, and it shone on Pallant House, which is opposite to the wall of the garden of Manor House School. When I heard the squeal, I was about 25 yards around in the wall opposite Pallant House, and I saw distinctly the form of a man and a boy. The man had the boy down on the ground. I shouted murder as loud as I could. When I shouted murder, the man ran away in the direction of Fairfield. I ran as fast as I could to Mrs. Randall's shop. On his way, he met John Platt. He grabbed Platt's sleeve and shouted out to him, "There's a man up there murdering a boy." John Platt later stated that he had asked Husband to take him to the scene, but the boy had appeared very scared and didn't want to go with him. Platt therefore took him by the hand and led him in the direction that he was saying the attack was taking place. On arrival, he found young Percy Searle laying in the road, bleeding profusely from 3 stab wounds to the throat. The child, who was in a pool of blood and mud with a package in his hand, gave 3 gasps and died. Mr. Platt is confident that from the time between him leaving Prince George's Street and the boy grabbing his sleeve, he must have been passing within a few yards of the spot at the very time the murder was being committed, but he saw or heard nothing. Husband said that the murderer was a tool, but beyond that he had no details at all. Platt sent Husband to fetch the police. However, instead of going for the police, Robert Husband headed home and left to others to alert the authorities of the murder. Soon, Sergeant Knapton had arrived at the scene, closely followed by Dr. Bond, who pronounced young Percy dead. At the inquest, Bond testified that there were only 3 wounds in the throat, the only severe one being a punctured gash which penetrated a blood vessel in the neck, causing death. The murderer apparently fouled through the bluntness of the knife to cut the throat and then dashed the point of the knife into the neck. Considerable force must have been used, but a boy might have committed the deed, according to the doctor. As the doctor was examining the body, a search was made of the immediate surroundings, and this led to the discovery of a knife that was covered in blood, which was laying in the road a few yards away from the body. Over the next few days, the police, acting on the description of the murderer given by Husband, arrested a man by the name of Thomas Clark. Clark had an iron cast alibi, which police looked into and was found to be satisfactory. Several people had been seen running to the train station at the approximate time of the murder, but all follow-ups by police drew a blank. The police were beginning to grow suspicious of Robert Husband, who in the aftermath had behaved in a suspicious manner. For one thing, when sent to fetch the police by John Platt, he had instead gone home to wash his hands. Platt stated that he had gone round to the boy's house where he found him drying his hands on a towel. Furthermore, Sergeant Knapton was becoming suspicious that Husband could have seen what he claimed to have seen. Knapton had tested the accuracy of the boy's statement as to seeing the murder by returning to the scene. He discovered it was impossible to see a person at the murder site from the spot at which Husband had said that he had been standing when he saw the attack. It was then found that the bloodstained knife which has been found near the scene of the crime did in fact belong to Robert Husband's brother, George. The police arrested Robert Husband and charged him with the murder of Percy Searle. His response on being charged was, "I never did it." At the police station, an examination of Husband's clothing revealed several spots of blood at the back of his cuff. He said he had these by claiming that he had cut his hand at work. There were, however, newspaper reports that when the murdered boy was being laid out on the stretcher, Husband placed the hands on the legs of the deceased towards the body, and this, it was claimed, may have been accounted for how the bloodstains came to be on his clothing. The knife that had been discovered had been identified by several persons. It originally belonged to a boy named Stevens, who gave it to Husband's elder brother George. George Husband later identified the knife as belonging to himself and stated that he had missed it on the Sunday evening when out for a walk. He usually carried it in his jacket pocket, and on Sunday he changed it from his everyday clothes to his Sunday clothes. He did not see it until after Sunday, until it was shown to him by Sergeant Knapton. Henry Wheeler, an errand boy, then came forward to say that he had met Husband at about 11 in the morning of the murder. Husband had shown him the knife and asked him, "Will you give me a penny for this knife?" Wheeler told him he didn't want the knife. As the police continued their investigations into the murder, several newspapers began looking into the personality of the accused, and some disturbing allegations were coming to light. According to a report in Lloyd's weekly newspaper, a school friend of Husband's had told police that when they had been playing together, Husband had produced a knife and had told his companion, "I am Jack the Ripper. I mean you no harm." The Western Times, meanwhile, informed its readers that the accused is stated to have developed a very brutal temperament of late and had frequently been reproved for his cruelty to animals. It seemed a fairly cut and dry case, at least as far as the police were concerned. Robert Husband had evidently murdered poor Percy Searle and had then invented the mysterious man in order to direct suspicion away from himself. On Wednesday the 5th of December 1888, Robert Husband appeared before Havant magistrates charged with murder. The final day of the inquest into the death of Percy Searle took place on the 12th of December 1888. The Morning Advertiser reported on the proceedings in its next day's edition. It mentioned the "I'm Jack the Ripper" incident and went into a little more detail. Charles Clark, aged 10 years old, said he saw the husband on 6 o'clock on the night of the murder when he said, "Here comes Jack the Ripper," and at the same time he held up an open knife. He pointed the knife at the witness. To the witness's knowledge, no other boy saw the incident. Meanwhile, Professor Tidy of Somerset House, London, to whom Husband's blood-stained clothing had been sent for examination, and who had previously said that the bloodstains found on the boy's shirt were at least a month old, testified that it would be extremely difficult to suppose that the fatal wound could have been inflicted without the hands or clothes of the murderer being bloodstained. Considerable force must have been used, and it would be very improbable that any person could have held the knife in the condition in which it was handed to him without getting his hands stained with blood. Referring to the condition of his son's hands when he come in on the night of murder, Robert's father, also called Robert, stated that he had sent his son at 6:05 on the night of the murder to get some money from Mrs. Farndon. He returned about 6:20 saying a murder had been committed. He put a 3-penny piece on the table in the full view of himself and his wife. There was a double burner lamp burning at the time, and the witnesses saw no blood on his son's hands. His mother ordered him to wash his holy hands. Husband's stepmother corroborated the evidence of her husband. She washed the towel on the following Wednesday morning, but there was nothing unusual upon it. The witness swore the clothes produced were those worn on the night of the murder. Husband had a clean shirt on before the day of the murder. She did not notice any stains. At 5 o'clock, the inquest court was cleared, and after more than 2 hours of deliberations, the jury returned a verdict of willful murder against some person or persons unknown. But as far as the police were concerned, the person responsible for the murder was already in their custody, and it seemed certain to them that the outcome of his trial would be a unanimous verdict of guilty. Robert Husband's trial for the willful murder of Percy Knight Searle took place at Winchester, with Mr Justice Stephen presiding. According to the Times, in a report dated the 21st of December 1888, his defending barrister, Mr Charles Matthews, argued in his summing up that the prisoner's account was a truthful one, and that having seen the occurrence, he ran back towards Randall's shop as fast as he could to give information. The prosecution not only said the prisoner committed the murder, but also immediately invented the defence about it having been done by a man. As to the knife, he urged that it was impossible that the prisoner's hands or clothes could have been free from marks of blood immediately afterwards if he had done the act. In conclusion, referring to the question as to who was the actual culprit, Mr Matthews alluded to the tragedies which had occurred in London in which no culprit had yet been found. Mr Justice Stephen informed the jury in his summing up that a crime done by any person over 7 and under 14 is a crime, unless it to be shown affirmatively that such person had sufficient capacity to know that the act was wrong. The jury must, he informed them, be satisfied that the boy had some adequate conception of the wickedness of the act and its awful consequences before they could convict him. Referring to that allegation that the prisoner had told a companion that he was Jack the Ripper, he advised the jury they would probably conclude that this was nothing more than childish play. Although, he said, it was strange that the crime should have been committed at all. The question for them was, did they feel quite sure that the prisoner did it? Evidently, the jury took Mr Justice's advice to heart, and having retired to consider their verdict, they returned, and after just 10 minutes deliberation, they found Robert Husband not guilty of the murder of Percy Knight Searle. He was duly discharged. A scene was witnessed when Husband reached his home. A large number of his former playmates met him and congratulated him on the results of the trial. Nobody was ever brought to justice for the murder of Percy Knight Searle. There were press reports in December 1889 that a man named John Henry Thompson had confessed to the crime, but he got so many of the facts surrounding the murder wrong that the police consider his statement to be useless. I'm here at the final resting place of young Percy Searle. Unfortunately, time hasn't been kind to the headstone, and it has unfortunately been destroyed. You would never even know that this lad was buried here. Luckily, through my job, I was able to locate Percy's grave location, so I can pay my respects to the young man. Easy for you, Percy. Just easy, young man. Once Robert Husband was acquitted, the police devoted so little time to continuing their investigation. They were convinced that Husband was guilty, and he had quite literally got away with murder.